Hello again to another Agakala React. Today we'll be watching the Baltic Sea Explained from FactSpark. And well, I'm watching it because honestly it's the Baltic Sea and Poland lays over the Baltic Sea and I kinda know that sea. I don't remember much from my lessons in school about it, but I just learned something new. Probably gonna learn something new because honestly I've been in school a really long time ago. There's probably a lot of new things now happening and we've been uncovered, and in all fairness, I wouldn't be surprised if soon the Baltic Sea gonna be considered a massive lake because it's not very salty anymore apparently. So let's just go.
In the northeastern part of the Atlantic Ocean, after passing the British Isles and through the North Sea, the ocean is squeezed into a long and narrow stretch, protruding deep into the northern European mainland. Hugged by the Central European Plains and the Fennoscandian Peninsula, a labyrinth of islands, straits, gulfs and spits stretches for almost 2,000 kilometers or 1,240 miles through the continental shelf, with many geographical features to explore, a rich geological history, and many impressive infrastructure projects, which we'll explore in this video. Chapter 1. The Geography of the Baltic Sea. Covering nearly 390,000 square kilometers, or 150,000 square miles, the Baltic Sea is classified as a marginal sea, meaning it is enclosed by land to most sides, and its brackish waters are surrounded by the countries of Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Russia, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Germany. The sea can be subdivided into 5 main sections, with the Baltic Sea, or the Kattegat, marking the entrance from the North Sea, the Baltic proper, occupying the central parts where most of the large islands are poking out of the water, and finally the Gulfs of Riga, Finland, and Bothnia, which reach even further into the European mainland. The first land you encounter from the Kattegat is insular Denmark, with the major islands of Zealand, Fyn, Lolland and Falster, creating a mesh of belts and fjords around the southwestern section of the Baltic Sea. From here, the so-called Baltic proper starts, which is considered the core of the Baltic Sea. From the massive chalk cliffs of Mon and Rügen, the southern shores turn into white sandy beaches behind a wall of forest along the Polish shore. At the Gulf of Gdansk, relentless currents and longshore drift have carried sands from these beaches to form several sandbanks and spits, which extend into the Baltic Sea and close off secluded lagoons along the way. These thin and fragile dividing lines are called spits, and if you wonder how exactly these are formed, I made an in-depth video about this topic, taking the neighboring Curonian spit between Kaliningrad and Lithuania as a case study. You can find the video in the description below. After passing the coasts of Lithuania and southeastern Latvia, the Gulf of Riga extends into the mainland, occupying a basin between Latvia and the neighboring Estonia. It marks the first of 3 major gulfs, which cover the most northern section of the Baltic Sea and harbors the Latvian capital of Riga on its southern shore. In this region of the Baltic Sea, a very high density of current and former capitals can be found, with Helsinki and Tallinn occupying the mouth of the neighboring Gulf of Finland, while Stockholm and the former Russian Empire capital St. Petersburg lay on the opposite ends of this latitude. The southern shores of the Gulf of Finland are still relatively smooth and sandy, but this changes drastically when traversing the narrow gulf.
Wow.
The northern shores start to
nice.
fracture apart into thousands of tiny islands and rock outcrops, which from here on forward characterize the rest of the Baltic coast, basically until we're back at the southern tip of Sweden. Southern Finland in particular is the most extreme example of this rugged and coarse coastline, with the Archipelago National Park alone covering 40,000 islands, yet it only constitutes a small part of the overall archipelago here. West of this island group lies the autonomous region of Åland, which is incorporated
I'm just gonna
into
stop
Finland,
here
while the
because
national language is actually Swedish.
in all fairness, I'm pretty sure they didn't teach us about that. They probably just like put the basics. And honestly, I learned more in first 3 minutes of that video than probably through whole lesson in school, though it was a long time ago.
And it marks the entrance into the last major subdivision of the Baltic Sea, the Gulf of Bothnia. After the narrow entrance to the Gulf, the sea opens up again before it closes in on the narrowest point of the Baltic Sea at South Kvarken, and is finally capped off by the Swedish-Finnish border, about 80 kilometers short of the polar circle. From the island of Holmen in South Kvarken, there's only a 25-kilometer stretch of water separating it from the Finnish land, and this shortcut has often been used to deliver mail in the past, when the sea was frozen during the long and harsh winters. Traveling down along the Swedish coast, we pass the islands of Gotland and Öland, roughly marking the latitude under which the Baltic Sea typically remains ice-free in the winter today. This ice cover, while it has become infrequent and unpredictable in recent years, has constituted a major pillar in the creation of the sea and its various stages throughout time, bringing us to Chapter 2, the geological history of the Baltic. About 40 million years ago, what is today the Baltic Sea used to be green plains and forests, with a dense network of rivers flowing through them. Waters from the Ural and Scandinavian mountains came together to form the Orbital River in the middle of it, which carried these water masses to a massive delta around today's North Sea. Since then, several ice age cycles have carved this riverbed deeper and wider, up to the point where it became a sea, which has undergone several distinct stages in the past 130,000 years. During the last warm period, around 115,000 years ago, the Eemian Sea had an outlet to Russia's White Sea, but this overall gradient to the north has shifted over time, with the most recent ice age creating the so-called Baltic Ice Lake, as the glaciers retreated. About 13,000 years ago, the hills of southern Sweden acted as a retaining bund towards the Atlantic Ocean, but with more and more glacial meltwater pooling into the basin, this barrier eventually broke, leveling out the water masses and draining approximately 20 meters through today's...
That was only 10,000 years ago?
Once the ice cover over the Fennoscandian Peninsula
they really should
the reduced
put some
pressure
more
on the continental shelf caused a rebound of the land levels, again cutting
maybe
off
I
its
just
connection
wasn't paying attention.
and creating the
That could be
Ancillary
a...
Lake,
as
which
well.
through thousands of years of erosion through today's Danish Straits, eventually transitioned into the Baltic Sea's recognizable shape today. Just as the Baltic Sea has undergone significant changes throughout its geological history, our lives can also go through transformative periods that test our resilience. When I started my studies abroad, I was under tremendous amounts of stress, which got to the point where I was experiencing physical symptoms from the pressure I was under. I knew I needed help, but as a student I couldn't afford to see a therapist regularly. Thankfully, my university offered free counseling services, and I started seeing the school psychologist a couple times per month, helping me to prioritize my own well-being. I'm incredibly grateful that I had access to free therapy services during this challenging part of my life, but unfortunately not everybody has these opportunities. That's why I think services like BetterHelp, the sponsor of today's video, are so valuable. BetterHelp is an online therapy platform that makes professional counseling more accessible and affordable for everyone. Through BetterHelp, you can connect with licensed therapists from the comfort of your own home through video calls, phone calls, or even messaging. They have a network of over 30,000 therapists, so you can find the right fit for your needs. And if you're not satisfied, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no extra cost. If you're struggling with stress, anxiety, or any other mental health challenges, I encourage you to give therapy a try. Visit betterhelp.com/factspark or select FactSpark and sign up for a special discount off your first month of therapy. Your mental health is worth investing in. And just like you can recover from periods of immense pressure, the seafloor of the Baltic Sea is recovering from over 100,000 years of kilometer-thick glacial ice sheets pushing it down. In a process called post-glacial rebound, the continental crust of northern Europe expands back into its original shape at a pace of around 8 millimeters per year, even outpacing the global sea level rise of about 3 millimeters annually. This development means that the gently sloped coastal regions of Finland were actually covered by a thin layer of water in the not-so-distant past. And every year, the surface area of Finland naturally increases by roughly 7 square kilometers, or 2.7 square miles due to the rising land. Going back to the time of the Great Orbital River, whose drainage basin covered nearly all of northern Europe a couple 100,000 years ago, the basin of today's Baltic Sea was actually covered in a vast pine tree forest. As part of the pine's defense mechanism against insects and fungi, the trees evolved a resin which seals any damage to their bark. When these resin-covered trees are becoming uprooted and buried in an oxygen-starved environment like the bottom of a lake or a river, after enough time the resin hardens to such an extent that the material closely resembles rock, giving us the rare gemstone we call amber today. Due to the Baltic Sea's recent geological history,
that's raisins.
Forests turning into sea.
I swear to God, like they definitely were raisins, not amber.
Due to the
That's just strange mistake, wow.
The Baltic Sea's recent geological history of forests turning into sea, it is one of the world's hotspots for amber hunting, and the translucent orange gem is deeply rooted in the history and heritage of the constituting cultures of the Baltic Sea. For a deep dive into the full process of how amber is formed, you can find a video I made a couple years ago in the description below. The craze for amber even went so far that an entire amber room was built in the early 18th century, whose decorations were later gifted to the Russian Tsar Peter the Great, who displayed them in his summer residence outside of St. Petersburg. Hailed as the eighth wonder of the world, the room's decorations were later looted by the retreating forces of Nazi Germany during the Second World War, and brought
never to be found.
from when the whereabouts remain a mystery after an extensive bombing campaign carried out by the Allied forces in August 1944. Today, the remnants of the Amber Room are probably lost forever, but there are many other engineering landmarks around the Baltic Sea which are still standing today, bringing us to Chapter 3. Infrastructure around the Baltic Sea. With so many countries, capitals, and major cities around the Baltic Sea, it has been a primary artery for travel and commerce across Northern Europe for thousands of years. 38 active ferry connections between the major Baltic cities and islands transport millions of passengers every year, and a network of bridges and tunnels, especially across the Danish archipelago, are allowing for efficient travel between the countries. To extend this network even more, Denmark is currently constructing the Fehmarn Belt Tunnel between the islands.
I was just thinking there should be another connection there.
To Hamburg through a direct highway and train route, and subsequently bringing the whole of Scandinavia closer to the European mainland. The 18-kilometer long immersed tunnel will be the longest of its kind and is expected to be completed in 2029. Allowing travel and commerce between the constituting countries hasn't always been the focus though, and many engineering remnants can be found throughout the drainage basin of the Baltic Sea, where countries try to find alternative ways to transport their goods in and out of the Baltic Sea. Whoever controlled the Danish straits in the past has often levied tolls on any goods coming in and out of the Baltic Sea, and the first entity to work on an alternative route was the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In 1784, the Dnieper-Bug Canal was finished and connected the Bug River to the Pripyat and then the Dnieper River, allowing a navigable connection between the Baltic and Black Sea. After 2 cycles of decline and reconstruction across the last 200 years, however, a hydropower plant around the city of Brest now makes the canal unusable for continuous passage. Over 100 years later, the German Empire also tried to avoid Danish tolls and the bad weather of the Kattegat, so they constructed the Kiel Canal, cutting through the state of Schleswig-Holstein to the mouth of the Elbe River. This canal also allowed the growing German Navy to connect their Baltic and North Sea fleets in anticipation of coming conflict on the continent. Opposite to the Dnieper-Bug Canal, the Kiel Canal is still thriving today, actually clocking in the highest total vessel traffic of any artificial waterway in the world, with around 32,000 commercial and leisure vessels passing by every year, trying to cut a few hundred kilometers of their journey between the seas. 40 years later, the next project attempted to connect the Russian Barents Sea coast to the Baltic Sea through a canal to the White Sea. The White Sea Canal, constructed during Stalin's reign in 1933, didn't receive the funding it required though, and only offered a depth of 3.5 meters right after its construction, yielding it almost instantly useless for any significant commercial cargo transportation. The most recent canal constructed around the Baltic Sea, and the last stop of this video, was constructed through the Vistula Spit in Poland in 2022, which frees Polish vessels and barges from having to cross through Russian territorial waters to leave or get into the Vistula Lagoon. And with this, our journey around the Baltic Sea is coming to an end, and I hope you learned something new about this fascinating arm of the North Atlantic Ocean. If you want to learn more about the Baltic Sea's neighbor to the west, I also made a deep dive into the geography and history of the North Sea, which you can check out here, or watch what YouTube thinks is best for you here. See you in the next one. Cheers.
Okay. But the question is, now, was there raisins or was there amber? Because I'm pretty sure that was golden raisins. Let's just check out if someone noticed that mistake in the actual video itself. And yeah, actually that was a lot of information for such a short video as well. And it was really good too. Taking account that, well, last time I learned about Baltic, I don't know how many years ago, 30? 25 years ago or something like that. Yeah, I'm not the only one here. I laughed at this timestamp as those are golden raisins, not chunks of amber. Okay, so I'm not the only one thinking that's raisins, so at least that. And so I can prove it to you. I'm gonna show you how those raisins look like, golden raisins, and how do amber looks. And this is not something I should be focusing on. in my opinion. But well, why not? So this is raisins and amber. Well, amber have a lot of explanations as well, like meanings in my opinion. Like look at this. So this is amber, and amber wouldn't be so, you know, it's amber, it's kind of slick and smooth and all that. And this is raisins. You can see where I'm coming from. The raisins are all wrinkled. Amber is pretty much never that wrinkled. But no, Baltic Sea is interesting, see, taking from that video. And that was really good. And I didn't realize it actually came from existence from the river. I'm pretty sure they should really change update the way how they teach about geography in Poland and stuff like that. So, did you learn something new? Did you know where Baltic Sea is? Have you ever been over there? And would you like to see it? Because I definitely like to see the national park in Finland of those islands. That looks cool. Okay, thank you very much for watching and I see you tomorrow. Bye!